guys, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, welcome. My name is Kiana and I do a lot of sewing and fashion videos, and today I have a tutorial on this dress. So this is going to be an in-depth sewing tutorial. If you would like to purchase the pattern, that is the first link down below. Check out my Etsy. But if you want to see the whole design, patterning, prototyping process, that is on YouTube Shorts, as well as my Instagram and TikTok, but I will link that series down below. So if you're interested in seeing the whole beginning to end process of this design, go check it out. Anyways, if you would like to purchase the pattern, like I said, the link is down below. But you guys know I love to give my subscribers a little reward for checking out this video early on. So you can use the code Wednesday for 30% off until tomorrow at midnight Eastern time. I'm using the code Wednesday because, as you can see, this dress is very much Wednesday Addams. I just watched the series last month or a couple months ago and obsessed with it. Been obsessed with Wednesday Addams ever since, so I had to make this little dress that's very kind of like heavily inspired by Wednesday Addams. Anyways, I do want to note some things before we jump in. This lace trimming, super optional. You don't need to do it. The instructions for sewing do not change at all if you decide you don't want some lace trim. Just sew it as is without the lace. This is definitely more of an intermediate level pattern, especially with the trimming, but it can definitely be more of an advanced beginner project, but I would say it leans definitely more intermediate. Yeah, but just make sure you guys really check out the instruction pamphlet because that has a lot of really important information there. This is mostly just the sewing tutorial, but make sure you do check that out. But yeah, I think that's everything. Oh, and as always, all the equipment that I'm using is gonna be linked in the video description, and all the supplies and materials you need for this project can be found in that first link down below in the Etsy link. Anyways, without further ado, let's just get into the tutorial. So first, print out your pattern. Make sure you do print it out at 100% scale. I like to print my pattern out on cardstock just to make it a little bit more durable, but that's totally up to you. And then just line up your pieces of paper edge to edge without overlapping or trimming down your paper. If you don't have borderless, like I don't have borderless, that's totally fine. Just make sure you print it out at 100% scale and you're lining up your paper edge to edge using those lettered and numbered diamonds at the intersection of each pattern piece. Once everything is lined up, you can take your tape and just tape right over the pattern piece. And then to cut out your pattern, refer to your instruction pamphlet to figure out what size you are. Make sure you are not just guessing and you're actually referring to the instruction pamphlet so that you can create the most accurate size. Now just cut out on the corresponding line. For reference, I'm cutting out a size small. Now we're going to move on to the construction. So first we're going to do the bodice of the dress. So place your back bodice to the front bodice, right sides together, and line it up at the shoulder and side seams, and then just pin it in place. Now you can sew all of the seams with your serger, but if you don't have a serger, you can use your home sewing machine on a zigzag stitch setting. You need to use some kind of stretch stitch to sew this garment since it is made with stretch fabric. For these seams, I'm going to choose to use my serger. But again, like I said, you can use your regular home sewing machine. Now for the sleeves, I'm going to take each sleeve and fold in half right sides together and pin it along the inseam of the sleeve. Then I'm just going to serge the inseam of that sleeve. And of course, repeat this on both sleeves. Now moving on to the flounce of each sleeve. So for each flounce, I'm going to fold it right sides together and pin it along that short and straight edge. Then I'm just going to serge that seam. Now for the flounce, there is a lining and a shell piece. So I'm going to repeat this process on both the lining piece and the shell piece. And of course, I'm going to repeat that for each sleeve. Now, once that's completed, decide if you would like to add a lace trim or not. Totally, you do not need a lace trim, but if you want to, this is the time where we need to add it. So I'm going to grab my lace trim. I referenced this in the instruction pamphlet, but remember, you do need a lace trim that is able to go around curves easily. So it needs to be something that's either like gathered like this or pleated, something that can easily go around curves. So I'm going to place my lace right sides together with the shell of the flounce. And I'm gonna line up the edge of the lace with the edge of the shell. And I'm gonna pin that really well around the entire flounce. Then I'm just going to stitch this in place in the seam allowance using a basting stitch. I'm just gonna stay stitch this entire lace down just so that I can be sure it stays in place when I sew the lining. So I'm going to take my lining flounce now and place it right sides together with the shell flounce with the lace sandwiched in between and repin everything together. Once I do that, I'm gonna take it over to my sewing machine and use my normal 1/2 inch seam allowance to sew everything in place. I'm just gonna sew right around the entire flounce. Once I finish sewing, I'm just gonna bring it over to my serger and serge the edge now. Once everything is serged, you can go ahead and just flip it right side out, and the lace should look beautiful around the edge. Now at this point you can go ahead and press the edge so everything is nice and crisp, but I just want to warn you that sometimes you cannot press certain laces, so definitely grab some scrap lace and use your iron on it because it might melt your lace depending on what it's made from. And when you're ironing it anyways, you don't want to really iron directly on the lace. Try and just iron around on the fabric. Now it's time to attach our flounce to the rest of our sleeves. So I'm just going to place the flounce at the edge of the sleeve, right sides together. I'm just inserting the sleeve into the flounce like so and making sure everything is lined up, and then I'm just going to pin around this seam. Once everything is pinned in place, you can go ahead and just serge that seam. Now it's time to prepare our Peter Pan collar. So first I'm going to take the lining of the collar and take my interfacing, and I'm going to place the interfacing on the wrong side of the collar and press that in place. And I'm placing that interfacing right in the middle of the collar piece, and you'll notice that the interfacing shouldn't end up in any of the seam allowance. So there should be about 1/2 inch around the entire collar where the interfacing is not. Now that we have our lining prepared, we're going to add our lace trim the exact same way that we did the flounce. So I'm going to place my lace right sides together with the shell, pin it in place, and then stay stitch that in place. Then I'm going to take my lining, place it right side down to the shell, right sides together, pin again, and then I'm going to sew all the way around the outside of this collar. But before I flip the collar right side out, I'm just going to notch along this part of the curve of the collar. To notch, just clip little triangles in the seam allowance at this area. What this is going to do is reduce the bulk of the seam allowance so that when you flip it right side out, it lays really nice and smooth. Now again, you can go ahead and press the seam, but like I said before, be super careful. Now we can go ahead and prepare our facing. So grab your facing and line it up at the shoulder seams, and then just serge those together. And don't forget to be pressing your seams. Now we need to add interfacing on our facing. So just grab your interfacing and place it on the wrong side of the facing, and make sure you line it up with the long edge instead of the shorter curved edge. So you want to line it up with the hem of the facing instead of with the neckline. And then just go and bring that over to your iron and press that in place. Now that we've added the interfacing, we can finish preparing the facing by just serging around the long edge of the facing. So serge around the entirety of that long edge without cutting off any fabric. Now our facing is ready and our collar is ready, so we can go ahead and add that to the bodice of our dress. Before I do that though, if you guys added the lace trim, I want to make you aware that it will overlap the collar like this, which looks a little bit undesirable. So when we're adding the collar to the neckline, I want you to just fold the lace under so that it won't overlap the collar. See how I did that so it doesn't overlap the collar? That's exactly what you want to do when you're sewing it around the neckline. So to sew everything on, I have the dress right side out. I'm going to place the collar on top of the dress. I would pin the collar in place really good first, and then once that's pinned in place, I'm going to add the facing on top of the collar, right sides together, and then just use those previous pins to hold the facing in place. This way I just know that everything on the collar is okay first before I start worrying about the facing. Once everything's pinned together, I'm gonna go ahead and sew the neckline. Using a zigzag stitch, of course, everything is a zigzag stitch, and then I'm gonna serge. Now I'm just going to understitch the facing in place. So to understitch, I have the facing of the dress on the right, the body of the dress and the collar of the dress on the left, and the seam allowance underneath pointed towards the right, towards the facing. So to understitch, I'm going to stitch through the facing and catch the seam allowance underneath. I'm going to stitch about 1/8 of an inch away from that neckline seam. And when I'm doing this, like I said, all of these stitches are zigzag. So I'm going to use a zigzag stitch for this. Otherwise, you won't be able to stretch this over your head still. This understitching is going to help the facing stay inside the garment while you're wearing it. It's going to help prevent it from rolling out. And to further prevent the facing from rolling out while you're wearing it, I'm just going to tack the edge of the facing down at the shoulder seams at the seam allowance. So I'm just going to hand stitch that in place. Now it's time to insert the sleeves into the bodice. So to do this, of course, you're going to sew right side together. So I like to turn my bodice inside out and have my sleeves right side out so that when I place the sleeve cap into the arm's eye of the bodice, everything is right sides together. I'm gonna pin the sleeve in place, making sure to pay attention to the inseam of the sleeve and the side seam of the bodice. You want that to be lined up. I'm also going to pay special attention to the notches on the sleeve and the shoulder seam notch of the sleeve. So just make sure everything is lined up correctly and pin it in place, and then you can go ahead and serge those sleeves in. Now that the bodice is fully done, we can go ahead and work on the skirt. We're doing this a little bit backwards. Normally I would do the skirt before the sleeves and the collar, but this is a special case because of that interesting asymmetrical hemline, and you're gonna see what I mean later on. So first, for the skirt, I'm going to place the shell pieces right sides together and pin and serge along those side seams. And I'm gonna repeat that exact process for the lining as well. Now at this point is when you want to try on your bodice and try on the skirt shell piece as well with your bodice without sewing them together. And you're going to see if you want to hem this. Because we're adding a trim, it's going to be really hard to hem later on. So just use your pattern as a guide to see if you want to shorten the skirt, and shorten it based on your pattern. Don't try and free cut it. You're going to want to see if you want to shorten the dress. Now we can go ahead and add the lace trim. So I'm just going to do this the exact same way that we just did the collar, that we just did the flounce, so I don't want to keep explaining the exact same thing to you. So we'll speed through this a little bit. Same thing as before, place the lace right sides together at the edge of the hem, and then stay stitch that in place. Then once you do that, you can add the lining and repin that right sides together with the shell with the lace sandwiched in between. And then go ahead and sew that with your sewing machine, and then after that you can serge it. However, before you flip it right side out, I'm again going to clip and notch into this seam allowance. So right here, I'm going to create some clips, and then around this part of the hem, I'm going to create notches so that we can reduce the bulk so that the curve can lay nice and flat when we turn it right side out. And now finally, the last seam of the dress is the waistline. So place the skirt and the bodice right sides together around the waistline. Make sure you're placing the front of the skirt with the front of the bodice and the back of the skirt with the back of the bodice. And then you can just serge that waistline together. And then after the seam, you are done. Alright guys, that is how you make this colored flounce sleeve mini dress. Let me know what you think down in the comments, and let me know what your sewing plans are for this. What color are you gonna make it in? What trim are you gonna use or not use? What fabric are you planning on using? And don't forget, the pattern for this is the first link down below, and you can use the code Wednesday to get 30% off this pattern until tomorrow at midnight Eastern time. If you like this video or learned anything at all, feel free to give me a thumbs up because it's the easiest way to support your favorite creators for free. Also feel free to follow me on Instagram and TikTok. My handle is Kiana Bonollo. And make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell so that you don't miss out on future patterns or discounts in the future. But I think that is everything. So thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you guys next time.